Okay, so you come in a room, you sit down, you drink a cup of coffee, that's all telling a story. You want to be in charge of what story you're telling. So in other words, what is it that I'm doing? A, awareness. B, then what do I do to become aware of my habits, counteract my habits, and then adopt habits that I feel suit the given circumstances of the character, of the situation, of the narrative.
That is Gail Sixsmith. She's an actor, art director, screenwriter and movement specialist. She's talking about how, as human beings, we're transmitting messages all the time, whether we're aware of it or not. An actor has to learn to embody those messages in how they portray a character through gesture, posturing, quality of voice, intonation, and so on. Unless there are layers of subtext at play, what they're saying in words has to be congruent with what their body is transmitting. And she reminds us that this is something that inspirational communicators do really well. Gail coaches performing arts students to use their bodies effectively in becoming what she describes as expressive, potent and versatile. She draws on a wide range of physical practice which reflects her extensive interest and line of inquiry, artistic inquiry, so dance theatre, choreographic performance, body weather, Butoh, Alba Emoting, physical improvisation, Capoeira, Laban, elemental transformation, motion capture, mime, yoga and 5 rhythms. As you listen to Gail, perhaps you'll hear the energy in her voice or even imagine what her gestures might be or how she's communicating through her body when she's talking to me as she emphasises certain words or ideas. As a former Lady Macbeth, an artistic collaborator and now an acting coach, you can hear how important it is to Gail to choose her words very carefully, to be precise in what she's describing to us. She wants us to understand her clearly, with no ambiguity, and it's important that what she says is as close to the truth, to reality, as possible. We meandered across many aspects of conversation, what makes for a good conversation, what inspires her, where joy sits, honesty, ego, difficult conversations, and even her worst conversational habit. We also exchange thoughts about how dismissive we can be of each other, what we may be in danger of writing out of our conversation culture because of the presence of addictive technologies like our mobile phones, or the way in the workplace we're able to read body language less and less. Add to that our preference for avoiding conflict or avoiding having that difficult conversation, or the fear of getting caught not knowing something. It's easy to find ways to disconnect or even overreact in situations where we feel uneasy or exposed or a bit vulnerable. I also asked Gail if she thinks it's possible to be animated and dishonest, or at least hold something back at the same time. Her answer brought us back to her trade in congruency between our words and our body movement, between our energy and our impulses. Have a listen. Hello and welcome, Gail.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Today's chat in Better Conversations is really about your perspective. Maybe it'd be a good place to start would be for you to tell us a little bit more about your work.
For a long time I was a performer and actor, and I also made work. Latterly I focus on more coaching and directing, but also it's more about the training sort of trainee actors. And I have a specialism which is the body and expressivity in a kind of fully embodied way.
In what ways would you say that your work depends on having a good conversation?
Well, in essence, my work is literally about communication. What is explicit, what is implicit, what is felt and not expressed, the congruence of body, voice and intention. We spend a lot of time analysing that and sort of investigating it. As a coach, I have to be really effective in the way that I'm imparting information and how I enrol and inspire my students. And this involves careful choice of language, but also a lot of checking in to just determine how things are landing. I regard it as a conversation. So rather than me just spouting information. I think part of that is also what's working, but also crucially what's not working or what could work better, and sort of getting that all on the table.
Mm-hmm. What's your unique perspective on conversations then?
I set a lot of store by through in the importance of body language. So that, I suppose you could say, is my specialism, because I teach it, I coach it, I talk about how significant it is, I have tools that I equip the students with, and also I notice it. So I pick them up on their body language all the time and flag up. Okay, so the bottom line is we transmit something all the time, whether or not we're conscious of it or unconscious of it. And that's an energetic thing, but it's also, it's wrapped up and sewn into the habits that we have, our gesturing habits, our postural habits, and so on. And this is story that we are transmitting. And of course, as an acting coach and as an artist, you talk about, okay, so you come in a room, you sit down, you drink a cup of coffee, that's all telling a story. You want to be in charge of what story you're telling. So in other words, so what is it that I'm doing? A, awareness. B, then what do I do to become aware of my habits, counteract my habits, and then adopt habits that I feel suit the given circumstances of the character, of the situation, of the narrative. So that's a big element of how I communicate and what I'm interested in and what I see and observe.
And that actually comes across just talking to you. Obviously people can't see you, but you talk and communicate naturally using all parts of your body. You're very fluid in, how that comes out. So it's really quite fascinating to watch you. It's very captivating to watch you when you're talking, because it's very expressive, not just through your choice of words, but through the movement within your body as you're telling a story or communicating a feeling or a scenario.
Yeah, I mean, that's when people are convincing, they are embodied in their communication. Their gesturing is what we call embodied. It's congruent. There's a congruency between intention, vocal intonation, or quality of voice, and what we're doing with our bodies. And all the most inspirational communicators are congruent in that. And obviously, we're in the business of trying to coach our trainee actors to become really convincing in what they're doing. And so that is part of what I am getting them to investigate and become more effective at sort of managing in themselves. But it's also just in terms of just everyday communication. You're likely to be more engaging and more effective as a communicator if that's what's occurring and that's what you're doing.
And do some people find that easier to come to than others? Because it's not just talking about what's important to that person at the time, they're actually getting into character.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, gesturing always has to be motivated, because, you can't just move your arms around, because it's so obvious when it's not motivated. So, and we have loads of impulses all the time. We're riddled with impulses, but usually we don't act on them. And
can you elaborate on what you mean by impulse?
I suppose an impulse could be a thought or a feeling. It could even be an instinctive moment of wanting to reach out or touch or grab hold of something or gesture in a way that helps us to kind of realise or make more manifest what it is that we're discussing or talking about or referring to. And we get used to shutting down those impulses in our culture, in many cultures. Some cultural habits are more inclined to allow those impulses to be much more freely expressed. And Italians, for example, they gesticulate all the time. It's part of the way that they communicate. But for many people, that's not the case. Sometimes a communication it feels like it's all a bit heady and there's no body involved. The trouble is that as human beings, about 80% of how we communicate is through body language. That's how we get the signals about what's going on from this person and how we read a person. So if there's nothing going on there, then it's very hard to kind of figure out, to kind of really get proper engagement. So anyway, that's just something that I would say is a part of my unique perspective. Another thing that... and I would also say that it's if you want better conversations, ramping up sensitivity of and awareness to that, I think helps, can help the conversations be more effective, really. The other thing that I feel is important, and again is very sewn into the kind of work and world that I exist in, is this idea of being fully present. So we talk about this quite a lot, and what does it mean? And it sounds so obvious, but actually, it's this idea of being really awake to what is happening in the here and now, and really responsive, therefore, to the micro changes that are occurring with this person in front of you, so that you're adjusting all the time and really connected with that. So it's very easy to be in autopilot. We spend a lot of time in autopilot. There aren't that many moments in our daily lives when we have to stay really present.
And that's interesting, because as a coach, I don't know if you find this, but I have developed a stamina for being able to sit and be present with a client, and for a full hour, and really be focused on what it is that they're grappling with or trying to get their head around, and be a true thinking partner or a sparring partner to where they're at. And so, the moments when something pops into your head, it's a bit like meditation. Something may pop into your head, and you have to learn to push that away.
All the time.
And it only takes 5 or 10 seconds of not being present, of being distracted, and you can lose the thread very quickly of what a client is saying. And your client feels it, because your gaze changes, or they've said something that actually turns out to be really significant for them, but we've missed it. It breaks the flow of conversation. And so, yes, as the work that you're doing and the coaching that I do, that ability to be 100% present constantly for that period of time is something that you build the stamina for.
Absolutely. And I think that these invasive thoughts that kind of pop up, or feelings actually, can, like you say, pull you out. And sometimes they're in future or past spaces as well. So there's a time sort of element to this as well. It's not just that they're there and they're here and they're now. It's like, oh my God, I've wandered over there and I've wandered back there. So we're pulled on this sort of strand through time as well, in terms of our attention. So that's, and I just think, like you, that the more present we are, the more effective the connection becomes, and ultimately the point of conversation is about connection. I would say I have to manage myself with that sometimes, because I'm often very, very busy at work, and I'm running down the corridor and running up and down the stairs, and there's somebody taps me on the shoulder, and it's a quick moment to have a catch up. I have to stop myself in my tracks and just say, okay, just let go of where you need to be right now and just concentrate on this person, even if it's for a minute, which sometimes it is, like make that minute count. So just trying to stay really conscious with it all.
And it makes a difference, doesn't it? That sense that if I am focused on you, even if it's for a minute, we can impart a connection, or you can make someone feel very special. They can feel it with your energy, your body, the position of your body relative to theirs.
Yes.
How deeply you are listening and what you're listening for, not just in terms of the words that they're using to communicate something to you, but their tone of voice, how they're communicating at the intensity of it, where the emotional charge is sitting for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the elements for you when you're talking to someone that are really important in
Honesty.
a conversation? Honesty.
Yeah. I set a lot of store by that. I suppose I'm quite known for being very candid. I'm not very good at veiling things, but also I don't see the point. I don't get the point of it. So I think honesty is challenging because we protect ourselves, and but sort of being prepared to really say what needs to be said, or ask what needs to be asked, or admit what we're not sure about. I don't see how you can have meaningful connection and conversation unless that is in the space. I don't get the point of it.
How do you feel when you're sensing something's not quite right here?
I guess it automatically would probably make me feel more guarded. If I suspect there may be an agenda, for example, or I'm not getting the whole story. I mean, obviously, people withhold information for all sorts of reasons. There's this idea of on a need-to-know basis, people will be given information. But I kind of believe that cultivating trust amongst people who work together, for example, or amongst people who come together, for one reason or another, where there is proper connection, that trust is everything. And everything, therefore, is possible. But everybody needs to be sort of willing to give of themselves to that. If there is this sense of self-protection, I mean, another thing I guess I would say would be ego. All right. So it feels a bit counterintuitive to sort of leave your ego at the door, but it really is a problem sometimes, and it just limits what's possible.
What, when an ego is in play, or there's not a consciousness about how our own ego is affecting our interactions?
I think certainly it's difficult when you feel that there's an ego in play somewhere in the space. That's what you observe or witness from without, I guess we have to manage our own egos as well. I don't know if I struggle with that as much as I struggle with something else, which is my passions, which can get the better of me. When I feel very impassioned and very strongly about something, and I feel it's important. You could say, well, that's your ego speaking, Gail, but for me, it's usually because I care a lot about the outcome or what needs to happen or what I perceive as something that's significant, and I would like it to be part of what's being considered. It's usually not really about my own personal what I want out of a situation. It's usually on behalf of something else or someone else or the others or the students or something. But I'm aware of the fact that sometimes I can get quite fired up.
As we all can.
But you know what? I'm dealing with that on a daily basis. Yeah, I realise that can be quite intense for other people. It's an ongoing quest to be a brilliant, a better communicator. Managing oneself inside that. The thing about the ego is that sometimes if that feels like there's a fixed position based on a point of view, and somebody's not willing to relinquish that or to soften on that, then it's like that limits the positive outcomes of any conversation.
Is there someone, or has there been someone in your life who's really influenced or shaped your perspective on conversations?
I suppose my mum. She's quite a unique individual, and she's lived a very, and still lives, a very full life. She was a mentor to many people, and a coach. She was an adventurer. She was. She has always been extremely active and dynamic in her life. She was a teacher as well, and she's also interested in a lot of things. So her interests are very diverse, and she's never been judgmental about anything. I don't think I've ever heard a judgmental statement come out of her mouth, and that, I think, is really inspirational, because it's so easy to make a judgment about something because it's not aligned with your own core values, for example. But she just has never been like that. So anyway, we have had many deep and fluid and interesting conversations about all sorts of things, and they're always very stimulating. I think we get to the nitty-gritty. We can bat things around. We can, reference other things that are outside of our sphere of experience. But it's always in order to, I don't know, just out of the curiosity of exploring something, So I always
find that fascinating when people can move between topics and make references or draw sort of thoughts from different spheres, different areas of life, but can also then dive deep into that in a way that's exploratory. And it's interesting you used a word, you describe your mum and the conversations being full of curiosity. Do you think that influences the joy of a conversation? Does that
most definitely, because I think if you're the best conversations are the ones where you are not sitting in that zone simply within your own perspective. You are drawn into the perspective of the other person. You visualise what they're visualising. You place yourself inside that perspective. You go through the story as they are explaining it. That you're willing to shift your perspective, and that it feels like an intuitive and natural part of what's happening because you're drawn in, or because you are genuinely curious and interested, and that goes a long way to kind of making the conversation mutually satisfying and rich, I think. And
those are the conversations that can go on for hours and hours.
Yeah, the only downside is that you can meander around and then you think, what was the point of the conversation again? What were we talking about again? But it doesn't matter. Yeah. I mean, there's that theory, isn't there, that guys, the point, it's like, what's the point? And what's the point? And what's the point? And this idea that women, I don't know whether this is actually based on any scientific fact, but there is this spiralling thing that happens. I think that's quite an interesting kind of, this is pointed triangle kind of concept, or the spiralling. But yeah, it's interesting. I quite like those conversations that kind of loop around and meander a bit.
And that's fascinating in itself, because very often in the workplace we don't have the time to meander and explore and just talk and see where things go. We usually have items to get through in a meeting and process through and come to decisions about things, and yet some of the most enlightened, innovative, interesting ideas come from that ability to be able to build and riff off each other, off other ideas. And I tend to think that can only happen when you make the space for a meandering conversation where it wanders from maybe one topic to another, because you're always, as you just described, you're exploring spaces in a different way. You're able to see things from different perspectives, because that's the purpose of the conversation, is actually to just explore, rather than to determine or to decide. But we lose that ability to be comfortable with making time for that kind of a conversation.
And yet it's so crucial, and time well spent. You know, it's because it's about the quality of that, of what that reaps as well. It's so it's like a real refresh button. It's like boing. You know, and the quality of the connection that then you automatically feel as a result of that. Oh wow, we really are all on the same page. We really are a team. We're really kind of singing from the same hymn sheet. We really want the same things, or we really are aligned. You know, within our myriad different perspectives.
There's a synchrony. There's a synchrony between us, right? Where we're connecting the same parts of the brain in your mind to my mind. Yes. I'm building, and you know, there's a movement, isn't there, between the two?
There's an exchange. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because a lot, you know, it is about this exchange. It is about this communion, really, isn't it? That's what great conversation is. And when I talk about what theatre is and the special, unique value of theatre, the magical nature of it, which is that great theatre employs the imagination of the audience. It draws the audience's imagination in, and it's a sort of communion, it's an exchange. So it's not that the audience is passively watching. They are engaged creatively in some way with what it is that's being presented to them, and they're drawn into that, and that's very unique. It's a very unique, special exchange, and it becomes increasingly important, this kind of communion, in a world where we are spending so much time with technology. These live personal encounters start to become essential. Otherwise I start to worry about our humanity. I start to worry about where we're going. I start to worry about what the future is going to look like and the way that people interface with each other. Because already, I might be going off piece now, but you know, even when you go to a shop and buy something, people are on their headsets, or they're not fully present. They're not engaging. They don't engage with the person who's serving them. There's not even eye contact. So how dismissing of the individual is that, you know? And then it's like, well, where are the places where we have proper connected conversation? It's scary, because then you think, oh, actually, it then starts to get written out of our world.
Well, it's interesting because when I talk to people about influencing, one of the pieces, you know, we're so reliant on what people say, so the verbal side of things, and we've become less able to read body language, less able to read, you know, the dynamics between two or three people in a room together, and if we dismiss those or don't use those as valuable clues, then we lose the ability to actually articulate what's going on in the room, what's the dynamic, to be able to name it. And if we can't name it, then we're less likely to have the skills and the ability to really lean into what may be going on. And so that many of us talk about ourselves as being, you know, avoiding conflict, not wanting to have a confrontation with people. Well, where we need to really lean into that more, and by understanding and being curious and fact-finding, why is it that someone thinks that way? How did they get to that conclusion with something? We are moving further and further away from through, because we've got something that we use as physical blockers, and by looking at our phones or being distracted in that way. So we're losing that ability to actually engage with what's really important, to lean into the body language, to lean into what someone may be thinking. And so being on autopilot, as you were talking about earlier, is so much easier. We have distractions that get in the way that mean we can get through that without having to give it much attention or thought. So I guess what I'm saying is we lose that ability to connect, and there are more and more reasons to disconnect from reading body language, reading other people, and having a reason to ask questions that create a better understanding. Yeah,
I certainly think I wholeheartedly agree with all of that, and I just picking up on the thing, this idea of leaning into something. It's like I don't see the point of avoiding the difficult conversations, because surely they're the most interesting. Let's figure out, let's get to the nitty gritty, let's have a little dig around there and see. Because ultimately it's the difficult areas that are where the problems sit. So if you're not prepared to go there and tell it like it is and get your hands dirty with that, then I don't see how you can kind of progress effectively. Or there'll be a limit to what's possible. But I understand that that's people feel protective of their patch or their space, or people don't like to are not willing to be in the not knowing. But actually, I don't know the answer. I don't know. Right. But let's maybe try and get some ideas on the table. I think people are a bit scared to admit what they don't know. Yes. But we don't know quite a lot of the time. And it's fine. It's fine.
Yes.
Being curious and open is essential. I think
and that's so true. A lot of leaders that I work with, it takes them time to come to that point, to just be comfortable with not knowing. It's interesting, as coaches, our role is not necessarily to know. We may have experiences that, where relevant, it may be fruitful to share, but let the individual come to their own determination as to whether that's really relevant or useful. But a lot of the where I've witnessed a confrontation in a meeting is because someone has assumed that their leader does know the answer, and the leader in that moment feels they should know the answer.
Yeah.
And so, the defences go up.
Absolutely.
And that that sense of fear that I've been caught out and I don't know the answer tends to be the place that we go to most easily. Whereas it takes some effort to kind of go, well, I haven't really thought about that. Where are you coming at it from? What are your thoughts on that? And because if we're the person that a task has been delegated to, of course we're going to be deep dive and know all the details and have figured out, how something fits together. And it's not the job of the leader to know those nitty-gritty details necessarily. It's if we've delegated something to someone, then that is their remit. So I feel like the conversations are a little bit warped in that the person who's been delegated the task, it's their role to share a perspective, and it's the role of the leader to create the space for the sharing of that perspective and invite conversation around it. But I witnessed so many times a leader just going, I've been caught. And I should know.
Yes.
But it's not their job to know. And then it ends up, two people at loggerheads, one feeling embarrassed that they've been caught, and the other person bewildered. Why have I got your back up? I just asked you
exactly, and then it becomes something else, and it becomes an emotional war zone,
right?
really.
Highly charged, and you can't. It's very hard to backtrack.
And then communication is completely blurred, or kind of. It does. It takes on a different dimension, and it's not really about. It's about saving face, in some way, which is
and especially
unhelpful.
You've got a room of people, right, as your witnesses, and that changes. That conversation might play out very differently if it was just those two people. But when you've got a group of people, as witnesses, everyone gets tense and goes, "Oops, where's this going to go?" This is very awkward or uncomfortable. And, what may be required in the moment is just to go, whoa, okay, let's start that again. Can we start that conversation again? But it's very hard to get yourself into that place.
I think it would be amazing if, there was more of this idea of let's just have an open dialogue and let's kind of work together to, well, that may sound a bit idealistic, but... or more honest dialogue, really.
Well, to your point about being honest,
can only be fruitful, useful.
So, what are you good at in conversations, Gail?
What am I good at? I can be a good listener. I think I can imagine the other perspective. I pick up on energetics quite a lot. I read body language, so I kind of can pick up the tells of discomfort or, there's quite a lot of information I generally glean subliminally from the way people just are next to me in a space. I think a kind of an honesty that I offer invites the conversation to be more real. And caring a lot about the things that I offer up. It can make for dynamism in a conversation or in an exchange. So, I'm a bit full on sometimes, and I know that may be quite challenging for some people, but there's a really strong, impassioned, energetic presence that is involved whenever I'm often in my world of communication. So I think that brings vitality. And also just, I am interested in a lot of things. I have inherited that, I think, from my mum. So I can talk about a lot of things and be genuinely interested in them, I may not have masses of facts to back up my opinions always, but there is a curiosity, and an interest.
Do you think it's possible to be animated and dishonest?
Oh, I suppose if people spend years perfecting the art, absolutely.
And not to say that they are being dishonest for malicious intents, but maybe holding something back, maybe being particular with what information they're sharing at the same, at that time.
Yeah, selective honesty, maybe. Yeah, or simply if they've got an agenda which is not in the interests of those parties that are receiving that information, I would say, is a dishonesty. So, yeah, I would say it is entirely possible, and some people are very clever at, they master it.
Do you think it's something you were alluding to, is with practice?
Yeah.
Do you think it can be, but it's not... As a natural, impromptu conversation, you couldn't be animated necessarily and be completely open, or do you think people can?
I think you can spot when it isn't. I think I could anyway. I think because what you're having to do is you're having to sort of shut down certain impulses and amplify others. Whereas I think when you're truly connected with what it is that you're saying, there's a lot of intuitive transitions that occur internally and then ripple out into the body in some way, even if it's just movement of fingers or shift of body language or the spine adjusts or something, you know. Although, remarkably, I'm always amazed, quite a lot of people manage to stay completely still when they talk. But it's interesting because I think some people manage to kind of operate purely from their brain rather than from their gut and their brain. You know, it's a different way of operating. I mean, again, it's fascinating to explore that, and quite a lot of the processes I work with open up these different kind of behaviours, you know, like working with the 4 elements, for example, earth, fire, air and water. Through doing that, through experiencing, you start to realise that water element, for example, really, you know, that sense of flow, yield, the you know, we discover it physically and energetically and dynamically, and then when you translate that to character in psychology, you realise that somebody who's more in water element is likely to be negotiating, whereas somebody who's in fixed earth, bound, rooted, strong, point of view, direct energy, they may not. They may be quite rigid, you know, and somebody who's very fire, you know, they're likely to have lots of impulse, lots of kind of big ideas, lots of passion, but, you know, it's kind of can be a bit out of control. So it's very interesting to kind of explore those from a purely physical, dynamic point of view. But then you start to, so these are aspects of personality, of aspects of behaviour. And then you can guide, you can put, you know, you can amplify some, come back to others, try to find a balance between them all, you know. It's quite fascinating.
Tell me, is there something about your conversational style that you wish you were better at, or that you are working on?
Yes, I suppose, just going back to what you were saying earlier about this idea of the invasive thoughts, or the kind of like I kind of sometimes get a bit overexcited, and then I kind of dying to consolidate or to affirm or to kind of join in or to add something to, and that person hasn't quite finished. So I have to rein myself in, or I interrupt and I say, I'm so sorry you haven't finished. So I am aware, but the kind of impulse is strong. So that definitely I think I have to manage myself with. Sometimes just losing the thread. Because obviously if conversations are rich, there's many elements to them and many aspects to them, and we kind of park these thoughts somewhere in space in our minds, and then ideally you kind of come back to them, or you know, you refer to them. It's not like you sit there in a conversation about making notes all the time. But actually we then forget that was something I wanted to mention in relation to that, and what was it again that we started with? What did we start with? So those sorts of things are, I think, obviously that this is the art of good conversation, when you can do that. And it's before television, in certain circles, the art of conversation was a deeply revered and valuable social kind of skill. And if we're not careful, we'll lose it. You know, you snooze, you lose. It disappears. It's like it needs to be practiced consciously. So we need to find opportunities to do it. And then when we are doing it, we need to make sure that we're doing it in the best way possible. Beyond that, making sure that I'm not in too strong of an emotional zone. You know, we get triggered. And when we get triggered, by that I mean that our blood's up, we're plugged into an emotional state, or that's bubbling up. We are no longer kind of rational. That's something I'm aware of, because I feel things quite strongly. So, yeah.
I completely agree with you, Gail, and it's been a truly lovely conversation. But before we wrap up, I wonder if you could share one key message about having better conversations that you'd like to leave with listeners.
Only that they are crucial. We need to endeavour to have them in our personal lives, within our relationships, in the workplace, with our colleagues. The quality of the communication we have influences massively the ongoing connections and dynamic evolutions of our relationships. And so it's worth putting the effort in to make sure that we are communicating as effectively as we possibly can. And so many of the things I've referenced today are kind of concerned with that. I and we all need to endeavour to continually improve the way that we communicate. And that does involve having better conversations where possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, well, thank you. I always love our conversations.
Yes,
Gail.
me too, absolutely.
I love where we wander and meander. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode as much as me. You'll find show notes for today's episode at papertuner.com/podcast, including more information about my guest, Gail Sixsmith. Better Conversations with me, Sehaam Cyrene, is where my guests open up with disarming honesty about what's important to them about conversations, what's hard, what frustrates them about poor conversations, their own worst habits as well as their best conversation skills, and what they wish more of for all of us. Each of my guests is an expert in their field and brings a passion to what they do with their time on this earth. It's a complete honour to learn what's important to my guests and an indulgence for me to dive deep into what makes for a better conversation. If you're a regular subscriber to Better Conversations, then thank you for continuing to be interested and supporting the podcast. If this is your first time tuning in to Better Conversations, then I hope you've enjoyed today's session and I would love you to subscribe. And please invite your friends, family and colleagues to sign up for Better Conversations. Feel free to send me your thoughts, questions and suggestions to betterconversations@papertuner.com. Be sure to listen to more episodes at papertuner.com/podcast. I'm Sehaam Cyrene, and this has been A Better Conversation. Bye for now.